there's certainly more work to be done to show new indications, to show that this is the best surgical treatment, and to show that in certain cases, I think this is even better than medical management for these chronic patients that are being treated with Diamox for years without necessary resolution of symptoms. The symptoms are under control, but patients have side effects from Diamox or Topamax or methazolamide or whatever medications they take. These patients would probably benefit from stenting if they have intolerance to medications. And that, I think, something we have to promote also with our colleagues and in our hospitals. Stenting versus shunting, I think it sounds like a great study, and there are a couple of efforts, one in England, one in the United States. I think, I'm not sure if the Barrow study is still recruiting, but it's a very difficult study to tell a patient that you are eligible for stenting, but it will randomize you between stenting and shunting. I think that's very difficult study to be done, but it's possible, and if it's done, it will show I think good outcomes for stenting. We need new stents designed for IIH, stents for pulsatile tinnitus, that will improve outcomes for our patients and help us make this treatment even safer and more simple. And I think there's a lot of room for stenting for patients with chronic headaches that are not typical for IIH, but it seems that certain migraine syndromes or chronic headache syndromes could be related to venous stenosis. And again, I'm not saying by any means that everybody with migraine should have venous stenting, but there is a group of patients that we need to identify accurately, and hopefully in the next few years. Certainly this is a study that we're looking to start soon in our system. We're looking into identifying another group of patients that would benefit from stenting down the road. And I think there's room for venous sinus thrombosis to be treated with stenting, acute or subacute or chronic. And certainly what we need is, and the patient groups need to help us here, is fight the insurance companies, because we're like at a constant battle here about getting approvals and hearing that this is a non-indicated procedure and it's an experimental procedure and et cetera, et cetera. So these are the things we have to focus in the next few years, in my opinion. And I believe this is my last slide. Yeah.
Thank you, Athos. That was great. Really a very nice summary. I have a question from the audience that is basic but very important. Why do you need a stent? Can't you do just an angioplasty? I mean, a balloon angioplasty.
The short answer is no. The angioplasty might help in cases where you want to, it's very severe narrowing, like a stiff narrowing from like a chronic thrombosis, a calcified granulation, something that does not allow easy access for our catheter system. But angioplasty alone as a treatment will not work, because it's almost certain that the moment the balloon is deflated, the sinus will recoil back into the narrowed state. And I've seen that. I've looked into this early on. Early on means many years ago, and that is not a viable option.
About the balloon, I have a question that's a personal question, because many physicians have asked me this question. When you have a very, very protrusive arachnoid granulation, and for example, it's partially calcified, or you suspect that you are going to need a balloon angioplasty, would you do a balloon angioplasty first and then place the stent? Or would you place the stent and do the balloon angioplasty only if there is still a residual gradient?
My approach is to do it only after stenting, is if there is residual stenosis or residual gradient. I do often use a balloon to navigate, again, in these cases where it's stiff stenosis, high grades, there is no room to advance, our catheter systems through. But I don't do this to open up the sinus so much that to facilitate the stent is to facilitate our, navigating through the area of stenosis. So I think I understood your question correctly. I would angioplasty post-stenting if needed.
Okay, I think that was a fair answer. We have 5 minutes. I wonder if we should open the can of worm that is chronic headaches with without typical IH. So I suppose that you have a patient with a lot of headaches. She's a young woman, likely overweight, and you suspect IH. I mean, you suspect that her headaches might be, might be an atypical IH. How would you explore this patient?
I think there is, I think the first step that may give you like a good answer is a lumbar puncture. Because if the patient doesn't necessarily need to have high intracranial pressure, it could be, it could be like a borderline pressure, it could be like in the 20s or 27 or 19, whatever it is. It's more important to see how the patient responds after the spinal tap. And if the patient improves after the spinal tap, even for a day or two, I think that's a strong indication that you will help by normalizing intracranial pressure. And I think, and that's one way to see this. Even though there is some literature that says that the response after intracranial pressure does not predict headache improvement after shunting, I believe there was a specific study. The reality is that you have to have a conversation with the patient, and I usually do these spinal taps myself. So I tell the patient, you have to think about this, keep a diary, the first 5 hours, the first evening, the next day. Because if you tell a patient, did you feel better after the spinal tap? And they say, no, actually it was worse. I say, what do you mean? Well, my usual headaches went away, but then I had worse headaches. I couldn't get out of bed, etc. So, you have to discuss what the patient means. It got better or not. And I think often, if you go into the details, you realize that the patients had some improvement of the chronic headaches from high pressure. Even if the spinal tap, the opening pressure wasn't like as it would qualify, for IIH. So I think that's easy. If you have that, I think it's reasonable to proceed with stenting, and there has a high likelihood of helping. Then the other group is that, and I will admit that, I had difficulty making that decision many times, is that there is no improvement after spinal tap. There is no, the pressure is not high. It's not going to be 10 or 12, but it's going to be 19, 20 something, maybe 25. But they do have severe stenosis and a significant gradient. And these patients I had a long discussion with, and I hesitated, and many times, I wouldn't say many times, but there's a few patients that I remember very well that made me very humble, because they insisted that they want to try this because they tried everything else and nothing worked, and it helped them. But others it didn't. So it's not like 100%, but I think that's a discussion between, if you don't have improvement after lumbar puncture, if there is a good gradient, I'm not talking about 8, 9, I'm talking about 15, 18, a significant gradient. Some venous stasis on the venogram at the area of stenosis. I think these patients are reasonable to consider stenting with the understanding that it's you cannot make any promises. So
there are two more questions from the audience. One is the stent reversible? The answer is no. But there is another question that is really difficult to answer, is that that some people go into remission with IH. So the disease will last, let's say, 10, sometime 10, 15 years. And then they will go into remission. The papilledema will go away with medical treatment. However, they will be left with chronic headaches. So knowing that the disease can go into remission, does this change your indication?
No, it doesn't, because I think we cannot predict when the patient will go in remission. I think it goes back to how you approach this disease and these patients. It goes back to, should we offer stenting because somebody has 70% stenosis on MRV or AD or whatever it is? Or should we make a decision based on symptoms, response to medical management, and quality of life? And I think at the time where you make this decision, you have to factor primarily the symptoms, not the presence of stenosis. And somebody may have stenosis and may never develop any significant symptom. Another person may have stenosis with mild symptoms and months, years later, develop the full spectrum of IIH. So I think it's difficult to predict who will go in remission without treatment. So I think you have to stick to, at least personally, I would stick to what I have been saying the last hour.